Okay, it's time. Hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining this talk. We're going to talk about SAP and open source. And I have to be honest, when I am walking around in the open source industry and people mention SAP, then it's not my immediately connection between open source and SAP. Nevertheless, when I was invited last October to come to the SAP Day in Waldorf, I was on stage together with Tobias, and we were talking about the Open Source Manifesto. And I thought it was such an eye-opener for me that I really thought it's a great topic to talk about here at SUSECon 2025 as well. So thank you all for joining. My name is Emil Brok. I'm Open Source Ambassador at SUSE, which basically means I try to do this as much as I can, shout every stage where I can, online and offline, how fantastic open source technologies are. And I'm here together with Tobias Gabriel.
Yeah, also a very warm welcome from my side. Really happy to be here and to talk to you about open source enterprises, SAP, how that all fits together. I'm part of SAP's open source program office, taking care of all things open source related, but more later about that.
Yeah, and it's also funny, right? We were not aware of that when we were putting in the request for this talk, that there actually would be an announcement this morning about Ranger on SAP applications. So that was really extremely cool. That made, I think, the talk that we're doing extra relevant. So we'll go into that in more detail later on as well. Let's go into the topic. So what we're going to talk about in this presentation is OSPO. And that's already funny, because in the open source world where I'm walking around, if you talk about an OSPO, especially in non-profit organizations, you talk about the Open Source Policy Office. But when I keep on saying it the wrong way, Tobias keeps on correcting me. No, it's not the Open Policy, it's the Open Program Office at SAP. Yeah. So we're going into the difference between those two. We will talk about what I said in the opening, so SAP and open source, how is that related? We're talking about history, where SAP and open source are at the moment, and how it is going forward. Of course, very curious how the relationship between SAP and SUSE is, and we will talk about the verticals, the several verticals where SUSE is aiming for and where SAP is aiming for, and how does that relate. And because it's a presentation in 2025, we have to have AI on the slide, so AI is there as well. Otherwise, it was not approved.
Yeah, always AI.
So let's go to the first slide. Tobias, I'm very curious, as I said in the opening, the value of open source, for me personally, is 100% clear. But can you tell me what is it, what attracts you so much about open source?
Yep. So, especially in enterprise software development or in software development in general, we have seen that without open source, you would reinvent the wheel again and again. And especially with latest trends like AI, we have seen that with open source, you have a lot of the tooling, a lot of the building blocks around it are open source, can be reused, can be contributed to, can be enhanced, and only that, and in my opinion, that's the only reason is why that goes so quickly, is this allows the community and every player to pretty much build upon each other and strive for new heights and enhance that whole field so quickly so that we can have pretty much AI news every day. And if we look back, that's not only happening with AI, but as well with the whole cloud topic, cloud infrastructure, how many of the topics were starting from Kubernetes to ingress controllers, to all the tooling around that. How much is there open source that you can use it and can enhance it or even build around it, allows you to focus on the important things. And for an enterprise like SAP, that's important as well, that nobody pays SAP for getting standard infrastructure, but for actual business value. So these things are quite important to focus on, and that's something open source allows, and why I think open source is so important. And yeah, Emil, what's your take on that?
Well, my job is open source ambassador, so it's clearly that I really live for open source. For me, it is really that I think that the world will be a better place, a nicer place, if all software would be open source. I know that's maybe some dot in the horizon, but that's what I think. And I think it even goes further. I would even hope my future picture is even that not only the IT industry would be open source, but even like if you think industries like the pharmaceutical industry, they should be open source as well, in my opinion. It would be really great that if something is developed, like a medicine, and then other companies can pick it up and make a fork, but then make it maybe just for a little different target group. Currently in the pharmaceutical industry, that's not possible. Luckily enough, we are acting in the IT industry where it is possible, and open source, as we all know here, is winning in some areas. But for me, I really believe that open source makes the world a nicer place.
Yeah, great. That's a really good answer. So, the next thing.
Yeah. As I said in the beginning, we have at SAP, you have the Open Source Program Office. And I'm really curious. Tell me more about SAP Open Source Program Office.
Yeah. So the SAP Open Source Program Office, we pretty much see ourselves as a team, a rather, I would call it small team. We are around 8 people, as an enabler of all of our developers. So at SAP, we have around 40,000 developers, plus a whole bunch of other roles, be it security, be it legal, be it license compliance, and all these different stakeholders which come to play in the open source field, because it's a very, very diverse field with a lot of different questions. And we see ourselves as a team which pretty much supports and advances our open source strategy and enables our teams to consume, contribute, and engage with open source. Because if you have so much open source software running, so much developers interacting with open source projects, there come up a lot of different questions. Be it from rather mundane questions like, which licenses can I use? To more complex questions like, how do I best interact with a specific community so that I get maybe my feature contributed and accepted? What works in one community and one project might not work in another one. And making people aware that, hey, open source is not a single entity and not everything which works with one project works with another one, but rather that you need to be aware that each project has its own community culture and how to best interact it. That's a bit what we try to give our developers and community to ensure that we engage there in a good way. The Open Source Program Office at SAP has been founded in 2018, and since then we worked internally quite hard on making our open source processes a bit easier so that we remove barriers which we had previously internally for colleagues to contribute to open source and do things which, in my opinion, make sense. Things like, hey, if you want to contribute a bug fix, you don't need 20 approvals for that, but rather do it. And ensuring that these things can happen is, in my opinion, also a very important thing for companies to engage with open source and improving it, because if you create too many hurdles there, it will only end up being like a rather isolated place. With that being said, we see ourselves not, because we are only 8 people in the Open Source Program Office, while we do some open source projects and actively contribute to some others, we see us more as a conductor which helps our other teams to work together, especially if you have teams which might not get along directly. Things like developer wants to contribute something, security says, no way, you can't do that, or with legal, and so that everyone is on the same side and we pretty much get the best outcome for everyone. That's sometimes not that easy, but I do think it's an important thing to get everyone on the same table and continue with that.
I have a question as well. Oh, actually, first I want to say that I prefer to have a meeting, a talk where there is interaction. So if you have any questions, comments, complaints, during the talk, then feel free to let yourself be heard, shown, and we'll love to go into that. So don't worry, don't have to wait till the end, jump in at any time. So at the moment, questions, comments, complaints? No? Okay, then we will continue. A little bit off script, but so there is the office, open source program office. What is your task? What you actually do on a day-to-day basis?
It's very diverse, to put it that way. It starts, so what we are doing is, for example, we have an internal policy on how you engage with open source that clarifies things like, hey, what kind of GitHub account should you use? Should you create one dedicated for your SAP work? Should you use your one which you probably already have? And outlines a bit of the things we expect from our development community, formalizing that. On the other side, we have now with AI a lot of questions around licensing for AI models, especially if there are things like Llama, which has some quite confusing licensing terms with like, hey, you can use it if you have less than, I think, 700 million end users, which is kind of specific. And these kind of questions come up from time to time. Or if a project requires a contributor license agreement, we do have to check that, talk with legal. Legal has to sign that. And so these are all the things which we kind of conduct and organize. On the other hand side, we do as well a bit of outreach. We have, for example, a webinar and podcast series where we talk a bit about, hey, what's happening in open source around SAP and in that ecosystem. So yeah, that's a bit of the day-to-day things. There come up a lot of questions, and that keeps busy.
Okay. Then I'm curious for the history, because we are now 2025. When did it start that SAP saw that open source, maybe Linux, which software, where did it start with, and can you give us a little bit of a history?
Yeah, I think the biggest starting point or milestone was, I think now roughly 30 years ago, when SAP started to port its ERP system, R3 back then, on Linux servers that looked back then something like that. And that was a demo shown at, I think, Hannover Messe, and there was a huge interest from the public as well as from some other people in having this. However, on the other side, there were some analysts which were not that positive about that. And I have this quote: Linux will never penetrate a backend system. It's not like the client saying, I want Linux. Corporate America doesn't care about Linux. And I think looking back, that quote probably didn't turn out so true. And I think we heard it here, but as well internally we can say Linux is arrived in corporate America and in corporate and in the world. And both mission-critical systems as well as a lot of SAP systems and other things are running on Linux and very well on Linux. And so I think that's something where we are way beyond. And yep.
So the history and where are we right now? So if you look at the usage of open source, you're managing that through the program office. Where are you right now?
Yeah, so one of the, I think, cooler projects we have at SAP or cooler initiatives is the so-called SAP Linux Lab, which both ensures that the Linux distributions we support, including SUSE, are well tested and well maintained, because customers, consumers don't really care about getting the SAP system and then having to take care about everything else, but rather they want to be sure that if they run their mission-critical software, their important ERP business on that it runs and works together with whatever else they have. And so the Linux Lab does this testing and ensures that it's compatible. And that's also a way for close collaboration with, for example, SUSE, to get insights into new upcoming features, as well as directly giving back feedback if there are any problems, and hopefully fixing them before they reach consumers and customers. And overall, the whole open source consumption has increased quite a lot, starting from like big building blocks like consuming Linux as a whole to more smaller components which are getting consumed, deployed, and operated. And so that whole topic is increasing very rapidly. And yeah.
Okay, well, so that's open source. Now I'm very curious, because we're at SUSECon here, where is the cooperation between SUSE, open source, and SAP?
Yeah, so SUSE and SAP both are working on ensuring that SAP and mission critical workload, I think we heard it today morning in the keynote, that this is very important to have a joint effort there to get the best out of it. And we heard it, I think, in the morning that I think every second presentation mentioned, yeah, we are running SAP on SUSE. And so that's quite important for us as well to have a reliable layer where we can deploy our applications on. And so I'm very confident about it. But looking at the next thing, so open source is not only arriving in the enterprise, but we probably have seen it in more public spaces as well. And Emil, you as an open source ambassador, and in the industry longer than I am, probably.
20 years.
Yeah. Where have you seen open source emerging over the last years or getting more public recognition?
Yeah, well, one of the examples we saw was SUSECon 2019, I believe. The one was supposed to happen in Ireland. Unfortunately, did not happen because of Corona. And that was one of the shitty things that happened to the world at that time. But what we saw was, from software point of view, in quite a few countries, a fantastic development. Because where earlier, before that time, often was said, it's not possible to go quickly and to create something, especially not government-oriented applications or software. Suddenly, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the UK, several countries, they were able to build a working, secure, hardened app for Corona-related. So it was for vaccination, for the tracing. And it was funny that, well, funny, and that's maybe the wrong word in this case, but it was specific that you saw that, hey, suddenly there is a lot more possible, and it would have been only possible based on open source software. If they would have gone for proprietary solutions, it would not have been possible to build it up that quickly. So I think that's one of the examples where you can see that open source became more and more mainstream. It was already known and mainstream. We, open source industry, won already a couple of wars from proprietary software on several areas. But here was a clear proof that it was the only way forward.
Yep. And at SAP, we actually were involved in the development of the German Corona Warn app, Corona tracing app.
Yeah.
And one thing we saw from the public as well as feedback is, especially because it was involved in tracing the public, there was a lot of skepsis about what does the app do, does the government track me, and these kind of questions. And having that as open source and having that the transparency behind it allowed as well the general public to review the app. Of course, not every person can review it, but it allowed special groups or special knowledgeable developers to check on that and don't trust on a single entity saying, hey, we looked at it, it looks fine. And for example, the Chaos Computer Club, a German non-profit organization which specializes in a lot of IT and also is rather critical of all non-open source software. They pretty much looked at that and said, hey, we kind of have nothing to complain about it, which is, to be honest, kind of their highest honor, which they give. And so that was something where we saw as well that, hey, open source can be a vehicle as well to gain public trust and ensuring public transparency. So that was a kind of technical cool project. but as Emil said, yeah, probably better without it.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, and Tobias, I'm curious. You talk about strategy. When we were talking in October, you told us about the Open Source Manifesto that SAP is holding on to. Can you tell us a bit more about the Open Source Manifesto?
Yep. So I think in summer last year, we finally officially put out an Open Source Manifesto for all of SAP, and it's as well publicly available. So if you go to opensource.sap.com, you can find it there as well, which outlines how we want to engage with open source, how we want to consume it, but as well how we want to contribute it. For example, that we as a company and each employee should look into, hey, do there exist open source alternatives to the things which we want to build in-house, and rather use them, contribute to them, enhance them, rather than reinventing the wheel. And as well, if you use something and improve upon that or fix a bug, that you should contribute back to the community and ensuring that we improve our building blocks, which we all pretty much consume on. And so that's something I find quite interesting and quite nice to have, and as well helps a lot internally to push that we go there a step further and further. So because at SAP it's a rather, I would say, old software company, there's still a long way to go in many of these aspects.
And if you look at the Open Source Manifesto, working together with an open source vendor like SUSE, do you see any benefit for our combined customers in working on IT projects where you work together with an open source company?
Yep, absolutely. So I think both with working together with SUSE and other open source projects or companies, that helps a lot in establishing transparency to the customers, and as well allowing them to have choice and different options available. So that's kind of important, and allowing them to pretty much know what they consume. And so that's kind of cool. But yeah, what do you think about the cooperation between SUSE and SAP?
I think that our customers, through partners or directly through us, can really benefit from working together with the two companies, especially if you look at the support possibilities. So open source, yes, absolutely. But if you want to have the security, the hardness of the software, and you want to make sure that your infrastructure is safe, you better get support on the open source software. So open source software, nice, but community open source software, maybe you don't have then the backup and the hardness, the security, the certification. So if you look at elements like NIS2 certification, you can only get, that's, by the way, I have to explain maybe, that's a European guideline for security on infrastructure. And to have that certification, or to be compliant with that certification, it's only possible if you have supported open source, because that's the way you can be compliant with that rules and regulations. So that's really important to see that it's great that it's open source, but please do not always combine it, associate it only with free, as in don't pay money for it, because I think most people here know, but even the software might be free, as in you don't pay for it. It's not that there is no cost involved. So getting support from a company like SUSE in combination with our partners or SAP is really vital to have a secure and hardened environment.
Yep.
So we had the announcement this morning, and when we prepared this presentation, you told me about, I hope I pronounce it correctly, Apiro.
Yeah.
And the announcement came this morning about Ranger on SAP for applications.
Yeah.
And when we talked about Apiro before, I was like, but that's very similar to somebody who is not deep into technology like I am.
Yep.
So I'm curious, can you explain the difference between Apiro, about Ranger on SAP for applications, and how does that relate, or how does it not relate to each other?
Maybe let me first say a few things about what this is even. And Apiro is pretty much, I would say, one of the biggest open source undertakings SAP has done so far. And it's part of a bigger European project called Important Project for Common European Interest Cloud Infrastructure and Services. Quite a mouthful. And it's part of a bigger initiatives to establish cloud infrastructure within Europe. And SAP, as part of that, has pretty much committed and is doing to contribute some of the infrastructure building blocks which we have developed internally. Parts of these are already open source. Parts of them are going open source within the next weeks and months to make them available to the community, both within Europe as well as worldwide, to consume and to do things. There are projects, and I think that's where the overlap comes from, like Project Ghana, which we use internally for our Kubernetes management. There are things like Ghana Linux, a small Linux distribution, which we use for some of our applications, and things like Iron Core, which is more a bare metal implementation for Kubernetes. And these are some of the projects which we are open sourcing and providing under that. But at the same time, this is what we are using internally, and these are just building blocks. So you can pretty much take them and use them or abuse them for your own purposes, but at the same time can mix and match them with other things. And I think that's the really important thing here, is to say this is not a single solution which you take, run, and get support for, but rather that's specific parts which you might find beneficial. We found beneficial for our own purposes, but together with other open source projects or other maybe even commercial solutions, which allows you to build up your own cloud infrastructure. And yeah.
Okay, so there's the difference, but also a lot of overlap between Apiro and SUSE Ranger for SAP applications. Is that how I stated correctly?
Yeah. We use most of these internally to provide the SAP Cloud or SAP Business Technology Platform, our cloud platform. And these have specific requirements which probably not everyone has, which doesn't run like 10,000 clusters. But rather, if you only run a couple of clusters and only have a rather small development DevOps team, you want to have somebody which you can call and pretty much have support for, and have completely different requirements from someone who runs a software with like 1,000 or 2,000 engineers on hand. And so that's, I think, the main difference is that these tools might be useful, and especially you might want to pick one or two of these, but they do not give you the full everything in one, and I have a single contact for them solution. So we are very happy to have them as open source and looking as well for contributors, community. So if you use them, feel free to as well talk later to me. But it's not a one-size-fits-all solution, which I think is very important to mention.
But it will be going upstream, and there will be Linux Foundation projects around it, correct?
Yeah. So currently, these projects are still under official, I would call, ownership of SAP. But we are at the moment in the process of transferring the governance of these projects under a new foundation within the Linux Foundation, so that we hope in the future to as well collaborate with others together on a joint governance of these projects and driving them as the building blocks we hope to these become for building cloud infrastructure. So that not only we control them for our own needs, but together with the community, together with others, can improve them so that everyone can hopefully benefit from some of these tools for their own use cases.
Yeah. You were saying earlier on that your job at the Open Source Program Office is like a conductor of an orchestra. also used the analogy of the car mechanic.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little more about how you see that? How does that work? And what kind of role do you play there?
Yep. So with open source and with a lot of different moving parts, and I would say moving people as well, there's a lot of community aspect to it and collaboration aspect to it, which requires you to be pretty much coordinating all the things and ensuring that, hey, the one thing you touch, don't break another thing, as well as ensuring that, hey, both parties know what they're doing. I lost it.
Yeah.
I lost it, sorry. But yeah, to continue on, I think one thing we wanted to talk about is, hey, just because you can touch things, and open source allows you to pretty much change whatever you want, and that's a really powerful thing to do. On the other hand side, do you really want to do that always? And I think, Emil, you had some stories about that as well.
Yeah, back to the NIS2, so the European legislation. There is quite a few of our customers, or potential customers, they say, why is NIS2 relevant? Because we have already ISO 27000X. Isn't that good enough? And the answer is maybe, because that's like the box of chocolates from Forrest Gump. Is you can get your chocolate, you can get your certification or your check mark, like it's done. But if you pick the chocolate, if you pick the IT infrastructure, it's possible to exclude supply chain security. And because of the possibility of excluding it, you don't know if you get your services, if you use a product that has got ISO 27000X, it could be secure enough, it can be also supply chain checkmarked, but maybe not, and that's what you don't know. NIS2, on the other hand, you're 100% sure that the company is checked also on supply chain security. So that's a big difference between ISO 27001 and NIS2 compliancy. And then you see here the slide on the triathlon of evaluation. That's what we use to explain that we all know that security is more and more important for several reasons. And if you get your customers are being damaged, at some point you will have to explain where it went wrong, or why it went wrong. And there is a personal liability for the founders, for the C-level, who decided on the infrastructure of an organization. And if you don't do an internal check, maybe then, well, actually maybe, sooner or later, an external intruder, somebody you don't want to have, can come into your infrastructure. So break your, really go through your security. If your end customer is damaged in some sort of way, then you are personally liable as a responsible person at the company. So you better have work together and have support from a company that has got this check mark, because it will be a lot easier to explain to a judge if your customer is damaged, that you are in line with their certification, instead of that you say the product that we're using was not supported or it was not checked.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Yeah, and even if you, I think the legal case might be true, but one thing we have seen as well is, even if you are secure, without proper certification and without showing that to a customer, you can say you are secure, but how should somebody trust you if you don't have a record? So certification helps a lot there in saying, hey, what we are doing is as well, or what we are saying is as well what we are doing. And so that helps a lot in the broader picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emil, so I'm now certified. Can I do whatever I want and everything is safe? Or?
Well, That's a very good question. If you look at your total stack and you have your NIS2 compliancy for the operating system, for Slash or another operating system, does that mean that you can go completely berserk? No is the answer, because obviously the operating system is only one piece of your stack. So it doesn't mean that you can completely berserk. Still, even though you have your certification, even though you have a secure environment, still you have to act reasonably. So if you go do stunts, you might still hurt your customers. And if you hurt your customers, you still might have a very difficult explanation in front of your judge. So a very good question, but no, it doesn't mean that you can do everything. Only one little piece of your stack is then checkmarked and certified. It's not that it's a complete certification with that.
Yeah, and you still have to use it in the right way.
Absolutely.
And I think with using it in the right way, a new interesting topic comes up with, we talked a lot about infrastructure, underlying things, a lot of technical cool things, but at the end of the day, nobody cares about the technical layer so much without actual applications and things which we can do with that. And I think we have talked a lot about what open source does for SAP, how we use it, but as well there exists a very wide spectrum of industries out there which use open source and use this underlying infrastructure. And so I wanted to ask you a bit, where do you see the differences there, and how does open source help there?
Yeah, well, I think one of the benefits of open source is that the flexibility is there. So it makes it possible for any other organizations to pick it up and to adjust it. So if there are specific needs, like for example, the telco, the telephone companies, if they have a specific need for the way the operating system is made, is assembled, then with open source, it's super simple, fairly simple, to adjust and to make a tailor-made product. So that made us, as SUSE, for us possible to create specific operating systems for specific customer groups.
Yeah. And now to the last and the big hype topic, AI.
Ooh.
And we have heard, or what I found quite interesting is back in 2023, there was an internal Google paper which already outlined, hey, Google doesn't have some secret AI source, but rather open source, and everybody else can pretty much rather easily catch up. And I think we have seen over the last years that this is true. So AI models have catched up, open source AI has catched up a lot and even exceeded in some parts proprietary models. And I would even argue have a great benefit that they are A, adjustable, so you can take them and further adjust them to your own needs.
Yeah.
And B, and that's especially important for regulated industries, allows you as well to run them on your own infrastructure within your own data center with your own data without worrying about leaking your data out. And earlier this year, Sam Altman from OpenAI even said that, hey, OpenAI has been on the wrong side of history concerning open source, and I at least interpret that in a way that they also see that as a trend, that the models itself don't hold too much value in itself, but rather that the tooling around it, the whole open source ecosystem can gain a lot from there. And I think that will narrow down in other of the IT topics as well, that open source will become more and more important there to creep up the stack pretty much and hopefully solve a lot of problems. And with that, I want to thank you all very much for listening to us, and I want to thank Emil for holding this presentation with me together. And I think we still got quite some time for questions, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now.
Any questions? Because we started, and otherwise I have a question for you, because we started with, and I saw some people nodding, like SAP and open source, that didn't really match. We tried to explain in the last 35 minutes that actually there is a strong match between open source and SAP. Did we work? Did we fulfill that task? Is it all clear now that, okay, companies that are not immediately associated with open source still rely very, very much on open source? Yes?
How do you see your company in the future?
You want to go first?
Yep. So especially regarding open source, I think the trends will continue. More open source software will get incorporated. And on the other side, that as well means that companies, including SAP, do need to take more responsibility as well in that regard. One cool thing, which actually happened just last week, and which I'm super happy we are now finally doing is, besides just contributing to existing code bases as well as being part of foundations, we now started a program to directly support smaller open source projects with money. Because sometimes money helps, and especially smaller open source projects which are not part of a big foundation and don't have like an established network around them, sometimes profit from that. And we have seen that, we just started with a pilot program to giving free projects a bit of money to support them, which we depend on. And I think something like that needs to happen more in the future to ensure that these components companies rely on are as well supported, either through manpower, either through contributions of code, either through money. In some way, we need to take more up there and pretty much support them going forward. What do you think?
Well, open source and SUSE is almost, I would say, one-on-one street, right? Because I would not work at SUSE if it would not be open source. So that's for me personally already one thing. But the future of SUSE and open source, I think it's very clear. It's in our vision. We recently rephrased our vision and mission. And open source is with capitals in both. So SUSE and open source are really one-on-one. And I think if you look at the relationship between SAP, SUSE and open source, in line with the announcement of this morning, where they said, even on stage, that they would begin with, they already began with the first applications within SUSE Ranger for SAP applications. And they told us all on stage that there is a lot more coming up. So I am really, really looking forward to which applications, which extra facilities and possibilities are in the future for SUSE Ranger for SAP applications.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments? Otherwise, I would like to see some hands, because in the beginning we were talking about SAP and open source, and I saw some nodding. Who was in the beginning of this presentation in the idea like, okay, that doesn't really match? Can I see some hands? You? No? No? So you all already, before this presentation, you had something, no, open source and SAP, that does relate? Has it changed, thanks to what we heard from Tobias? And the Open Source Manifesto they apparently have? Yep. See some nodding here? All right.
Awesome. Then, I think we did our job.
Yeah.
And I would say thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.